From KPRC Channel 2, this is Houston Newsmakers with Cambrell Marshall.
There is a belief in this country that no one is above the law, and that includes the President of the United States of America.
And with those words, Congressman Al Green lit a fuse of controversy and conversation about the possibility of impeaching President Trump. It's something that some Democrats and progressives had murmured about. The Congressman Green put it out there front and center. He joins me this morning. Congressman Green, always good to see you.
My honor to be with you. And if I may just say this to my friend in Congress, the Honorable Steve Scalise, who is the majority whip. My prayers are with him and his family. My understanding is that he's gone back into the hospital.
Yes, we understand that, and obviously all of us hope for the best for him and his recovery. Let's continue on talking about the impeachment talk. You came out there pretty strongly. What was it about what's been going on in this administration that makes you feel like that's something that's actually a viable option?
It wasn't something that I wanted to do. I felt compelled to do this because the president is not above the law. No one is above the law in this country. And when the president fired the FBI director, who was investigating his campaign for Russians' connections and their intrusion into our democracy, and then went on to give a tweet that may have been a form of intimidation, it became pretty clear to me that this was an impeachable act. The Congress of the United States of America is charged with impeachment. We act as a sort of a grand jury, not the same but similar. And if 218 members of Congress should so say that the president should be impeached, then he would be impeached. Not found guilty, the Senate has the trial.
Right. I understand all of that. Now, here's some of the realities. I'm kind of like a student of history.
Sure.
I know the previous couple of times when there's been impeachment in the atmosphere, when President Nixon, there was talk about that. Of course, he resigned before that, but when President Clinton was impeached. In both cases, the president, the ones who did the voting for impeachment were the power, the party in power. So you had Democrats when Nixon was being talked about. Clinton was president. You had Republicans. You're in a situation where there just doesn't seem to be that kind of political will.
Well, let's take 2 points on that. One, this is really not about whether or not they will join me and do this. It's not about Republicans. It's not about Democrats. It's about democracy. It's about government of the people, by the people. It's not about the Republicans because it's about the republic. And it's about what Franklin said when he said, you have a republic if you can keep it. So this is about maintaining the republic. And finally, this point, I believe that if the same standard is applied to this circumstance that would be applied if President Obama committed the same acts, I think we would have impeachment and you wouldn't have to have a single Democrat to vote for it. You've got 240 Republicans, and I bet you a good many of them would vote for it if they use the same standard that they would apply to President Obama.
Good point to make, but that also talks about the real partisan divide that we have in Washington, D.C. right now, does it not? And what is the challenge there, not only for situations like this regarding impeachment, but just in legislation? What's the challenge in trying to bridge that divide to make something happen like democracy is supposed to do?
Well, the challenge is this. There are people who would have us, those of us who are in the minority now, to capitulate, and they would call that cooperation, they would call that negotiation, but capitulation is not something that we can do. We still have to stand on our principles, just as Republicans have to stand on their principles. So if we can find common ground to stand on, we should do this. But we can't capitulate. We've got to stand our ground to protect the citizens that we represent.
What's the difference between capitulation and compromise?
Well, here's the difference. Capitulation would mean on the Affordable Care Act, concluding now that pre-existing conditions should no longer be covered, or that children shouldn't stay on their parents' plans until they're 26 years of age, or that you can now have caps on insurance. I refuse to participate in that. That's junk insurance. That's the kind of insurance that you pay for, and when you need it, you find out you have junk. I'm not going to support a junk bill that will produce junk insurance. I want people to have the same health care that I have. And the one thing that we can remember is this. At the end of the day, when all is said and done and we have this bill passed, whatever it may be, members of Congress are going to have good insurance. There will be people who will think that they'll have good insurance and won't, and those are the people I have to protect. I also have to protect people who are on Medicaid. Texas refused to take $100 billion of Medicaid money to expand it so that more people could be covered. Great case in point would be Texarkana, Texas. You live on the Arkansas side and you get good health care. You live on the Texas side, you've got to go to emergency rooms. Example was a lady who had a toothache. She had to go to the emergency room because she lived on the Texas side, and they got a bill for $600 after she went to the emergency room for a hole in her tooth, and all they gave her was a pain pill. So we want to make sure that people in Texas get the same level of health care as the people in Arkansas.
Well, the president came in and he talked about that the certain things before he was president about what would happen. Then once he got in, he said, okay, who knew that health care was so difficult? Now everybody kind of finds out it's difficult. Moving forward, now the House has passed, without your support, I should say, what they want to be the new health care reform, and now it's in the Senate. What are you expecting the Senate will do with what they're dealing with right now?
Well, I think the Senate will probably find itself in the same place the House was in. President Obama, pardon me, President Obama was a great president, wouldn't do this. President Trump encouraged the members of the House to pass that bill they passed. And then he called it mean. He's going to encourage the Senate to pass something just so that he can have a bill to sign, and then later on, he's going to talk about that bill and say that it didn't have heart. Remember, he said they should put heart in the bill. They should take that as a clue to understand that if they pass that bill and it gets a bad rating, he's going to say it didn't have heart. I wanted it to have more heart. So what he's doing is throwing them under the bus, and they are allowing it to happen to themselves.
What are your constituents telling you is most important about what they expect you to do and all those others in Congress about health care?
Here's what they want. They want pre-existing conditions protected so that people who are born with pre-existing conditions will have insurance coverage for the rest of their lives. They'll have health care for the rest of their lives. We had a Medicaid town hall meeting recently, and we had a person there who was born blind with cancer in both eyes. If not but for Medicaid, according to him, he would not have lived as long as he has. But because of Medicaid, he's been capable of not only surviving, but also thriving. Medicaid helps millions. If we pass the Senate bill, 22 million people are going to be without Medicaid insurance. 22 million. And by the way, if we pass the latest rendition that they're talking about, where they repeal only, it'll be 32 million. I won't support that.
Are there any areas of compromise that you can see out there that's been talked about? Everybody is in camps. Where is there compromise that can happen?
Well, the compromise has to start with the notion that there are some things that people deserve in insurance. They deserve a policy that they know will be there for them when they have health care needs. We can't sell people junk insurance. That's why the essential benefits were out there, so that everybody buying insurance, you would know that you have at least these essential benefits, which are very important to people.
And Congressman, I'm going to stop you there because we have much more to come on Houston Newsmakers Extra. We want people to go ahead and tune in because we're going to continue this conversation with much more about what you're talking about the health care, about the tone in Washington, and about your safety, threats against you. We want to talk about all of that. Congressman Green, thank you so much. We have Newsmakers Extra coming up. That's coming up. Go to click2houston.com, go to the news tab, and that's where you'll find Newsmakers Extra.